Hi, it's Colin Coward. I started The Volume to bring you some of the most authentic voices in sports. While you're here, make sure you hit subscribe. Thanks.
I've said this before on the podcast, and sometimes I have people that have been listening for a long time. The numbers show business is booming. We got a lot of new people listening. I don't know if everyone's heard me say this. I can only go off my interactions with someone. I think we can all relate to that. I'm sure during the Christmas times, when you're around your family, just a lot of gossip comes up, right? About people we all know, right? Family, friends, whatever. And everyone gives their side of the story. Sometimes people claim that so-and-so's an asshole or so-and-so's a great person. You go, God, in my interactions, it's the opposite, right? For the most part, if someone treats us well or is nice to us, we're going to like them, even if a lot of other people tell us they don't like the person. And in my interactions with the guy, Trent Baalke treated me well. He was always cool to me. But a lot of people, and let me repeat, a lot of people that I know do not like him. And his reputation around the NFL is not great. People think, again, this is not my opinion because he treated me well, but a lot of people think he's an asshole. And Urban Meyer, somehow he got his way to becoming a GM, and Urban Meyer gets fired. And then Rap Sheet said today, or I saw it right before the Monday Night Football game, is that he's going to basically run the coaching search. And I saw Benjamin Albright, who lives in Denver but covers the NFL and knows a lot of people. And I think Florio tweeted this out too. I don't know if that's going to make it easier for them to hire a coach. Remember several years ago when Joe Banner was running the Browns and no one would take the job? And I think people started telling Jimmy Haslam, no one's going to take your head coaching job with this guy as your president. And eventually he fired him. In this day and age, too, it's hard because so many coaches that have some juice want to bring in their own GM. Whether that's the right way to go or not, it's one thing if it's Sean Payton or Andy Reid or a guy with a long history of winning. It's another thing for some of these young coaches, to just think that they get to do everything. And it's a balance, right? But if you want to hire Byron Leftwich, and you have, in theory, a pretty good job because you have Trevor Lawrence, you have some cap space, you have a lot of good young players. But I just wonder, let's face it, even if you don't know him personally, and listen, Jim Harbaugh is a nut. He is a crazy SOB. I have a soft spot for him. I'm going to bet on Michigan this weekend. I'm a Jim Harbaugh fan, but I'll be the first to admit he's crazy. So it's not all Trent Baalke's fault, but they had a pretty public breakup. They butted heads big time. And Trent was kind of known, he backstabbed some coaches, fired guys, and just was always kind of a survivor. And it's the nature of the business, right? Because when you become a GM, you start making seven figures, everyone answers to you. You don't want to give up that job. I have friends in the NFL that, think this guy's a backstabber and that. There's a lot of backstabbing going on, especially the higher you get in the profession. But I do just wonder how difficult it's going to be for them to get the exact guy they want. And is Trent Baalke going to want a guy that's going to want some juice, or is he going to want a guy that just takes orders from him? And Brian Daboll, Leftwich, some of these guys, they might have some options. Doug Peterson has won a Super Bowl. Now, he's a mature guy. He's been around the block, but he also came from Philadelphia where, the front office has a lot of juice and he's been through that. Does he want to go through that again? Because I think it's fair to say that the Jags need a little bit of experience to get around this young phenom who has looked pretty bad this season. But young quarterbacks sometimes have bad starts. But he didn't just go from this highly touted can't-miss guy to sucking in a year. Now, he may never live up to the hype. And if I was a betting man, if you said, John, $5,000, does Trevor Lawrence become a borderline Hall of Famer or does he become an average to below quarterback? I would bet on the latter, right? But that doesn't mean that he can't turn it around. Coaches have such big impact, but I will be fascinated to see, do people want to work for Trent Baalke? And I'll talk a little bit later about Joe Judge. It is complicated, right? When you have incumbent GMs or when you have incumbent coaches, there's a hierarchy. And and coaches love poo-pooing this, it's going to be collaborative. It's going to be collaborative. We've all grown up in a house, right? The mom or dad either points to the other Jeff, Joan, Bill, James, Megan, mom, dad, someone has to make a decision. Say it all the time. It's much easier to make suggestions. Someone eventually has to make a decision. And in a draft room, it's either the coach or it's the GM. So they can say, well, we collaborate, we get on the same page. Eventually, someone grabs the fucking magnet from the wall. You don't both go up there with each hand and grab the magnet together. That's not the way it works. In the history of the sport, hell, in the history of sports, right? There's one person for the San Francisco Giants making decisions. There's one person for the LA Dodgers making decisions. Now, there are a lot of people in the room. Same deal with the Miami Heat. You want to sign a player? Pat Riley's signing off on it. Now, Eric Spoelstra has a lot of input. He, I'm sure, has his ear, and Pat Riley might rely on him for certain stuff. But at the end of the day, if Pat Riley wants to do something, they're going to do it. Just like forever with the New York Yankees. If George Steinbrenner wanted it, he was getting it. If the Dallas Cowboys, if Jerry Jones really wants it, it's happening. It doesn't mean that he doesn't rely on several people, his head coach, his top scout, whatever. But ultimately, there's only one person. Like when you got grounded, one parent looked at the other. And I've obviously in my home, it was always my dad. I was in other homes as my friends growing up, their mom, kind of dropped the hammer. But it was always one person. Because one person was always, I don't want to say indifferent or deferential to a situation, but would kind of pass the buck. And we've all been in these situations, if you were older than like 25, if you've worked normal jobs, where eventually it gets to a point where someone has to decide. And I just wonder if people want to stake their career on Trent Baalke picking their roster. Because as a head coach, if you're going to take a job, and we're right around the corner from that season, right? We are, if you're listening to this on Tuesday, we're 5 days and a week away from Black Monday and the coaching topics. Who's going to take what job? Who's getting hired where? It's a fun topic. Don't get it twisted. I love talking about it. But that is a huge element of these people taking the jobs. Who do I answer to? Who do I report to? Do I get to pick the players? Do I only get to set the roster on game days? Does he get to draft the players? And it's easy to everyone act like it's kumbaya, but certain people just are a little more alpha than others. They want to make the decision. Some people don't care. But most people don't care until they start losing games. And I think it's a fascinating kind of dynamic that the way the league has changed, right? When Matt Rule got, however, $62 million to go be the Panthers, it was clear he was going to pick the players. You can put a guy in the GM spot, he answers to Matt Rule. He just does. There are rare situations. Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis, they've worked together for 15 years. Andy Reid has known Brett Veach for over almost 2 decades. So yeah, he's proven, and Andy lets him pick the players. But if Andy wanted to, he could pick the players. He relies on Veach because he trusts him. But it's taken them, and I was there when the trust was being born, right? And it's continued to grow. Same thing, John Schneider and Pete Carroll. John Schneider earned that trust over time. But when you first start working with each other, it doesn't just happen. I would imagine if you just had drinks with Dan Campbell and his GM or Arthur Smith and his GM in Atlanta in some of these newly formed relationships, like they're not true believers in each other. They may have disagreed on this. They may have agreed on that. They may have listened to him on one thing. Like it's like any relationship, right? Especially, and unlike like our dating lives, when you start dating someone, it's usually really good at the beginning. Most coaching lives, especially when you get hired as especially a young coach, you're going to a terrible team. So it's going to be tough. It's actually going to test the relationship. Most of our normal relationships, whether it's a business partnership or a significant other, if you get tested early on and it's really ugly, like you would be in like a 3-win season, you probably wouldn't last. But if you do, it's meant to be. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description, and make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.